Thank you, Cami. Really appreciate you having me on this webinar today. I'm really excited to talk about, micro communities and the importance of using micro communities in marketing. But I thought it was important to first kind of set a baseline to understand what I call brand relevance. And I think all of us on this webinar does understand what being relevant to an audience means, but how to actually use data to understand and how to be more relevant is, in my opinion, the opportunity. And this is a model that we put together probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it has evolved over the last several years, but it's built off this concept of economics and supply and demand. And so when you look at this model and you look at the demand side, it's looking at different audiences, right? It's traditional media, it's influencers, it's audience groups, and within that, it's micro communities. And so depending upon who you're talking to, if it's a PR person, they might say, well, our audience is traditional media or a group of influencers. If you're talking to a direct marketing person or lead gen, they might say our audience are C-suite, or our audience are millennials in Portland who wear, Birkenstocks and don't wear deodorant. I don't know. So it just depends upon who you're talking to. But the model really is around understanding the topics and the stories and the trends that are demanding the attention of your audience. So if you use data analysis to understand what the media is writing about as it relates to fashion or 5G or cybersecurity or sneakers, and begin to see what those sub narratives are, then you can start to turn around and ask yourself, well, are we meeting the demand of the audience with our supply of content? What we're publishing on our blogs, on our newsrooms, how we get coverage in the media, or what we publish on social media. Like, is there an overlap? Is there white space? And so today I'm going to talk about this bottom group, this audience group, because even when you talk about audiences, there are several nuances, because not every CEO is the same. Not every millennial in Portland who wears Birkenstocks is the same. They have different interests, they have different characteristics, they have different media preferences. So I'm going to talk about today how to use, audience segmentation or audience analysis to then uncover these insights and build these micro communities. And then more importantly, how to build a marketing program to reach these audiences as well. So let's first start to ensure that we all understand what a micro community is. And I'm just going to read from the slide here. It's a subsegment of a larger audience that share similar values, interests, characteristics, and a worldview, right? We all have different worldviews. We have different political opinions. We have different interests in our food and dining, and everything. So those little nuances make a difference, because that's where you find white space. As a marketer or a communicator, you need to differentiate yourself from your competitors. And the only way to do that is to find that white space. And so by building these micro communities and studying them, you can do that. You can find that little nuance, that little North Star, that little, unique corner of the market that you can kind of capitalize on that your competitors aren't, based on that particular insight. So I have two examples. One is a more B2B for those of you who work in a technology or B2B company. Also one that's a consumer example. The first one here is a B2B example, and we're looking at an audience of data scientists. So, data science is kind of a buzzword. Lots of data scientists work at Meltwater. You probably have a lot of data scientists working if you're using Meltwater in within your organization to analyze data. But even within the context of a data scientists, there are several different micro communities here. So this cluster analysis is just that. It's looking at an audience of about 10,000 self-identified data scientists. More importantly, who are they, right? We know that they're all data scientists, but what do they actually do? And you can see these different clusters here. You have education or academia. There's a small, like brownish cluster. It's kind of small. You have your media. So these are journalists and the media who may not be data scientists, but they're covering data science in general. Then you have your hardcore, data science, machine learning, engineering types in the middle. And that's what takes up the majority of this particular audience segment. Then you have your analyst, right? These are those who may not be as technical. They're mining the data, they're understanding insights. They're kind of doing what I do because I'm not a data scientist, but they're also within that data science segment. Then you have a couple of others, data and analytics, and then developers. So these are like DevOps, people who are building software and programming it. So This is important because, again, the media that the data science, this core group in the middle, they may prefer to read different media publications than the analyst, or they may use certain language and certain terminology that is different from that of the analyst community. Same with professors, right? They're going to be looking at more academia related content. They're probably talking with their peers on social media about curriculum or solving, world problems using data science and technology. So there's so many different ways to kind of slice and dice this data, and that's the opportunity. Well, that's a challenge with micro communities, but it's also there in the opportunity, because the challenge is being able to build an audience like this and then cluster the audience and then segment the audience and then analyze, each of these different micro communities. But that then is the opportunity, because then if you can find that white space and understand, okay, well, if I'm a music brand and I want to, and I don't know why a data scientist might be an audience, but let's just say that they are, or better yet, if I'm a brand that's trying to reach data science and I want to reach them in a unique way, and I want to maybe potentially tap into either Spotify or some type of music, sharing service, I can understand, well, what types of music do these groups listen to? Or do they use Pandora, or are they using, Spotify? And if so, if they're using Spotify, maybe we do some playlists. We create some playlists that we share on social media. We target data scientists or whatever. So there's a lot of different ways to make this type of data actionable, and that's just one way. So let's look at the next audience of luxury car owners, and this is a little bit more kind of disconnected. In fact, let me go back to this slide here. Notice how those little lines are there. There's a lot of like crossover. It looks kind of like a galaxy, right? All these like little things connected. Whereas if you look at the luxury car owners, they're not so connected, right? They're very different individuals. And so these are people who, and this is social data, right? This isn't like primary research data. This is basically data, excuse me, of a group of individuals talking about their luxury cars, right? And that luxury car could be a BMW, could be, a Tesla, Mercedes, you name it. But these are kind of self-identified luxury car owners, and they're segmented in very unique and different ways. If you look down here, you have at the bottom and in the green, you have suburban dads. Now, how do we know that? How do we know that they're suburban dads? Well, a lot of times they talk about living in certain cities or living in certain suburbs, south of south or north or east of a larger kind of a larger city. So, and there's other characteristics that we can identify to understand that they, yes, in fact, are suburban dads. Then we also have a unique group on the left in blue, which are authors. These are the writers who are writing about, in Car and Magazine or Motor Trend or some media publication that are, they cover the luxury car owner space. Then there's a segment at the top right, which are business travelers. Then you have tech enthusiasts, and then sales and marketing people. And so, the question that I get oftentimes is, well, how do you know that they're working in sales and marketing, or how do you know that they're, interested in technology? And you'd be surprised at the data that's available in social media. And by the way, this is all public data, right? This is data that, you can use Meltwater for and several other platforms to understand unique people and more importantly, what is top of mind for them. What are they talking about? And that's, not just who they follow and where they live and, their demographics and all the basic stuff, but what's top of mind for them today. And that's the importance of micro communities, right? Because years ago, before, influencer marketing was a thing, there was this thing called customer advocacy. And it's not really, the term isn't used as much as it used to, but it's a way of building a community of like-minded individuals who have a natural affinity towards your brand and activating them, giving them love, giving them product, giving them, listening to what they're saying. So, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but that is the power of micro communities, because the reality is you cannot reach everybody with your messaging, with your narrative, with your ads, with your content. Because if you're trying to reach luxury car owners, well, and you're Audi, well, not only are you competing with, BMW and Mercedes and Jaguar and all them, but you're also competing with the airlines, right? The airlines that want to reach that business traveler. You're also competing with, the Lenovo, the HPs and the Apples of the world, because they want to reach those tech enthusiasts. And all of those companies have very large budgets. and they're all targeting the same people through paid media, through content, through social, through even PR and earned media. So all of a sudden, like now you're one brand, you're one company. Maybe you don't have a large budget. Maybe you're a challenger brand. How do you at least start to peel away at this audience? And that's where micro communities come into effect, right? Where you start with a small micro community and you grow from there. So I'm going to continue on here and jump into the audience architecture. And there are a couple of different ways to build these audiences. And so if you're not taking notes, take notes now, grab some screenshots, because this is like real learning. This is stuff that you can literally take away and begin to implement today in your organization. So let me first talk about the specialized audience. Okay. So these are, if you work in a B2B or healthcare brand, this is perfect, because these are people who are self-identified. Okay. If I'm a physician or an oncologist or a psychologist, then I usually tell the world in my bio, I'm a psychologist, I'm a oncologist, I'm a pediatrician, whatever. And I work for Kaiser, or I work for this company. If I'm in B2B, I typically will say in my bio, I'm an engineer. I'm a developer, or in my case, I'm interested in IPA. I prefer the Niners, the Lakers. I mean, everything in my bio is about me. So, and the way to build that is typically through a bio search, right? You search different bios. You can do basic bio searches in Twitter. You just click, do your search in Twitter search, click on accounts, and you can start to see the different way people are building their audience, or identifying themselves within a particular in terms of what they do. So B2B in healthcare, it's really good. Harder to do when you're looking at more millennial audiences, or niche audiences, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But for example, affinity-based audiences is good for, like I said earlier, that millennial in Portland, or the millennial in New York, in Rochester, who is interested in sports and sneakers, or the Gen Xer in, it doesn't even have to be a generation. It could be the person living in Austin, Texas, who is interested in this, and this, and talks about this, and that. So that is what I would call more of an affinity-based audiences. They don't necessarily they don't do the same type of work. Maybe they don't live in the same type of city, but they just have very similar or like-minded affinities. Now, when I say affinity, that just means they have, if I have an affinity towards Apple, that means I buy everything Apple. Or if I have an affinity towards Tesla, that means I get the Model X, I'm going to get the model whatever when it comes out. And so in social media, it's easy to find these audiences because, we talk about the things that we like. We follow the things that we like. If I'm interested in Apple, Apple's a different story because they don't have a huge social presence. But if I'm interested in Fitbit, as an example, I might follow Fitbit, the brand. I might follow Fitbit, their products. I might follow their CEO. So data can help us understand based on follower relationships, and my conversation. If I'm a huge fan of Apple, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to tell the world. So that is kind of, when you think about building these audiences and start to uncover your micro audience, you can start with this affinity-based searching. I have some examples here, sneakerheads in New York who read ESPN and Bleacher Report. So again, those things are very easy to find. The last one is a micro audience. Now, this is not necessarily a micro community, because and it could be, right? There's so many different ways and nuances in building audiences and understanding data. But in this case, the audience is typically, you start by looking for an audience, right? Typically good for, less than 500 people. And it's a combination of bio searches, follower data, social conversations. If you're like looking at influencers who are, fashion influencers, and you just want to study them and understand who they are and what they're talking about, this is a micro audience. Now, if that grows to several thousand, then you might start segmenting that audience to build your micro community, if that makes any sense. So another example might be business travelers, right? You might be looking for and build an audience for people who are traveling to and from Europe, or to and from South America, or the Middle East, as an example. And so you're looking for all these people and all these conversations that they're having, and maybe it could be less than 500, or it could be a little bit more, but they're not several 100,000, right? And we talk about affinity-based audiences and specialized audiences, we can talk anywhere between 5,000 up to 150,000 people who fit a particular parameter. But in this case, it's a micro audience. It's smaller. It's a little bit more defined. And even as that grows, then you would want to go through the process of self-segmentation and being able to build that micro community. Just look at my time. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the inputs into this audience architecture. And again, there's a lot of ways to do this, but you're going to need access to a couple of things. Obviously, their conversation. What are they saying? Interestingly enough, that Clubhouse is a new platform that has just launched. It's gaining a lot of traction in the marketplace. A lot of people are talking about Clubhouse. In fact, a lot of topics on Clubhouse. Everything from technology to fashion to culture to music to hip hop. In fact, I was in a room with a few folks who were original members of a New Edition. If any of you remember the band from like years ago, I grew up listening to R&B, and it was Ralph Tresvant, and he was in a Clubhouse, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And all these people in Clubhouse, you can't necessarily have a conversation in Clubhouse, but you have right now the conversations mainly on Twitter, so you can follow along the conversation that of what's happening in Clubhouse on Twitter, if that makes any sense. So if a room's on Clubhouse, people are talking about it on Twitter. So the point is that having access to this conversation is important, because people are real. Like when they talk about what they're passionate about, or quite frankly, what they hate, what they love. I mean, they bash brands, they love brands, they bash, politicians. We've seen it over the last 4 years, like just the level of animosity and language and bad behavior on both sides. So people are passionate about what they're talking about. And when you talk about, business audiences, obviously they're having more technical conversations. When you're talking about more consumer-based audiences, they're just talking about whatever they care about. So you're going to need access to understand that conversation. Also, what URLs they're sharing. So, if I'm an audience of millennials in New York, and I'm sharing, a bunch of content from ESPN articles about maybe LeBron James or the New York Knicks or, the Nets. And, then as a marketer or communicator, if I can uncover that data, now I know, okay, well, maybe we need to pitch this publication, because we know this particular audience is sharing a lot of content from this publication. So they're probably a reader of that publication. And if we get a story in that publication, maybe they will read that story and then share that story. So there's kind of a lot of ways to really think about some of these inputs here. Also, bio search, I mentioned that earlier, how they describe themselves in their bio. And quite frankly, like these bios change quite a bit. I think I change my bio once every 6 months or so. Some people change their bios all the time. In fact, we've also seen a trend on Twitter where people are also changing their username, not their handle, but their name. So, when we saw that with Black Lives Matter, where they put, instead of their name, or maybe it's their first name, then Black Lives Matter. Or on the tech side, if they go to an event, it's their name and the hashtag event. So we see that happening a lot. So doing bio searches frequently is important, because people change, people do it. Someone like myself, not as frequent, but other people do it often. And then affinities is, on the bottom left here, it's who they follow, right? So, if when I first joined social media, whether it's Facebook, not really LinkedIn, but Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I remember when I signed up, it said you should follow these accounts. We followed them, and then throughout the years, and I've been on social media for a long time. Throughout the years, new brands come along, new celebrities come along, new influencers come along, and what do we do as consumers, as people, right? We like, we comment, we share. We like, we follow, we share. And that's just kind of a habit. We do that all day. And so that data is collected. And the more I like a certain a celebrity or a type of music, a genre, or a group of people, of individuals, or types of technology, now we can start to look at that data and uncover what those affinities are. I mean, if you follow someone, you have an affinity towards it. Now, there's always a nuance, right? Because you might follow someone just to give them, annoy them, or, respond to them and argue with them. But for the most part, we follow things that we like. And then another input is just demographics, where they live. Now, this is interesting because, for the majority of people who are on social media, you're on your mobile phone. And when you're on your mobile phone, sometimes depending upon your settings, you don't necessarily set it to, where you are. It could be set based on like your longitude and latitude thing. And so if I travel a lot, which we haven't done so much in the last year, then my demographics change in these platforms, right? If I'm in New York and I'm tweeting about this, and this, or posting on Facebook, this, and that, then, and someone's trying to target me, well, they're going to target my profile as being in New York at that time versus being in San Francisco or the Bay Area. And then the last one is interests. So what else are they interested in? And this is important from a narrative, like a storytelling standpoint, because, too many times, brands are forcing their messaging down our throats. And I don't care what you think you are. I care what I think you are. And if I think you're something else than you're not, then I'm not saying that you need to change your narrative. What I'm saying is relate to me in a contextual way so that I can relate to you. And so that is important to when we think about what our audiences are interested in. And if there's any interest that may not be directly relevant to what our brand is, figuring out a way to align your narrative in a way that is maybe not so much quote unquote brand messaging, but it's kind of like it's related to your brand, it's aligned to your brand, but it's a little bit more relevant to the audience that you're trying to reach. All right. So one thing that I hate is going to a webinar and then like there's a bunch of theory and thoughts and stuff like that, and there's really no action, right? So I have some slides for you that it really would help you think about how to put some of this stuff into action. And the first one here is building data-driven personas. And so this kind of builds on what we've been talking about the last 20 minutes, right? When you've probably built personas in the past, right? You've probably downloaded a template from HubSpot and just filled it in based on who you think your audience is. In this case, this data is based on a real audience. These are architects, right? This is an audience of architects. This is actually real data, by the way. Now, Joe is not a real architect. He's somebody I pulled from iStock Photo, but it looks like he's posing as an architect. And I don't know if he lives in Chicago, but again, this part is kind of made up. But the other data around the interest, the top interest, what else are they interested in? Obviously, visual art design, but also science and sports. We can also look at their affinities as it relates to media. Okay, he reads Wired, he reads Gizmodo, he reads Medium, The Verge. By the way, he reads it. He's 9 times more likely to read Wired than Gen Pop. So when you start to compare this data to an index or a general population, then you can see those more unique affinities as it relates to audiences that you want to reach. Because if I were to put New York Times here, well, how different is that from a Gen Pop or something more common like a Nike, right? Again, when you compare it to an index, you can find those more unique insights. So data-driven personas is huge because, again, it helps all the marketing organization, whether you're direct marketing, channel marketing, even sales, begin to use this data to formulate a plan in order to reach these audiences in the channels where they spend their most time. This is what we would call like a conversational analysis, right? So this is a conversation amongst an audience on what is trending. Now, if you look to the right here, this is what I would call like a topical conversation analysis. And you'll see some interesting words in here like, broadband and 5G network and wireless. I think this was a network of, technologists or, tech enthusiasts that we built. We wanted to understand like, what were they talking about as it related to like Wi-Fi connectivity and things like that. And these inner boxes here, if you just watch my mouse for a second, these inner boxes, and I don't know if you're going to be able to get that on video, so I won't say that. But if you look here at these inner boxes, right, you see connectivity, wireless, streaming, broadband, 5G network. Those are all subtopics of the larger conversation of connectivity, 5G wireless connectivity. So, and if you look within like connectivity, you see government and broadband and 5G network and intelligence. These are all verbatim keywords that this audience is using when they're talking about 5G network. And so, and this is like gold. If I'm in search, if I'm on the search team, I'm going to say, okay, well, if this is what the audience is talking about, I want to make sure that we are bidding on all these keywords, because we do know that audiences are typically, the way that they talk is the way that they search. So I'm going to make sure I'm bidding on these keywords. I'm also going to make sure that our website is optimized and, with all the on-page stuff and HTML and metadata and internal linking, that I'm using these keywords because I want to relate to my audience as best as I can. Okay. So it goes back to relating and relationships and, micro communities, because if you did this at the micro community level, then you could start to build these little hubs of content, which is targeted solely towards these micro communities. And again, these are verbatim words that they're using in their social conversations. We also can look at hashtags as well, right? In this case, we're just looking at words and phrases, but also hashtags in terms of being able to use that data to in your social copy, in your targeting, when you're doing interest-based targeting, whatever hashtags that they're using, you want to use when you're targeting. Okay. On the left is just your general mentions of particular keywords. You can see there was a skyrocket of conversation as it related to COVID-19, just some general data. But I think the thing on the right, this what I would call a topical conversation analysis based on an audience, right? And a micro community, what's trending amongst their conversation. You can start to be as relevant as possible based on what is trending today. Because the reality is, when you talk about marketing in general and customers or prospects, and in this case, micro communities, what's trending today may not be trending tomorrow, right? They may not be. Right now, everybody's talking about Clubhouse, right? And then we also know that Twitter is also launching Twitter Spaces. Well, maybe next month it's Twitter Spaces, and maybe the month after that, Facebook acquires Clubhouse, and then it's not Clubhouse anymore, it's something else. So understanding these micro communities and I say tracking, it kind of sounds like NSA, Big Brotherish, but yes, tracking their conversations so that you understand what's relevant right now will allow you to kind of turn that content engine on and reach those micro communities with content that they care about right away. So a couple of other things, like from a larger marketing and communications platform, here are some things that you can learn from micro communities. You can learn topical relevance. Again, we just talked about that. What are they talking about? Not just at a very broad level, but really peeling the onion back and saying, okay, it's great that they're talking about fashion, but what about, is it fashion and technology? Is it fashion and IoT? Is it fashion and sneakers? If it's sneakers, is it, the larger brands like Nike or these up and coming sneaker brands or apparel brands that have the name recognition as Nike and others? So I'm name dropping a lot of companies, but hey, just bear with me if you work there. It's just the first name that came off the top of my head. So, but doing that allows you to align your narrative, your content strategy to what is relevant with this audience. So I talked about that. I also mentioned the keywords and phrases. So understanding the keywords and phrases of your micro community can inform headlines, blog posts, other form of long form content. If you're doing executive thought leadership, having executives use these words. If you're doing employee storytelling or employee advocacy, having your employees rally behind certain language so that they're using the same keywords. And then certainly that can inform paid media from a search standpoint, as well as SEO. When we think about media affinities, I kind of alluded to this a few times, but if you know what publications your micro community is reading and what they're sharing, well, that to me is, if I'm a PR person, and I'm not, but my colleagues who work in PR, that data they would find, amazing, right? They would be like, okay, this is perfect. We know who we need to prioritize from a media standpoint. Oh, by the way, we know that these audiences also follow these particular journalists, so we're going to build relationships with them too. So the PR team would find this data extremely valuable. And then I mentioned this also, hashtag usage. It's great because a lot of times we as brands are, we use a hashtag or we make up a hashtag, and please don't ever make up a hashtag. But if they, don't ever make a hashtag that's like a sentence or a paragraph, because they're difficult to read and just annoys me. But if you can understand the hashtags that your micro communities are using, a lot of times they're using hashtags you're not aware of. And if you use them, you can start to, be discoverable within this conversation. And then the last one is buying triggers. So, if I'm talking about buying a product, if you look at the purchase funnel, the conversation changes. Hey guys, I'm interested in buying, a calorie tracker, Fitbit or an iWatch or whatever, or I'm interested in a new app that tracks this, guys. Can anybody help me? Or I'm thinking about a Fitbit or, as I move down the purchase funnel, I'm thinking about a Fitbit or an iWatch. Anybody have any recommendations, right? So then you get into the consideration phase. All of those conversations are public, right? They're all happening. So if you can start to segment those within your micro community, then all of a sudden you can build your content strategy that aligns to their buyer's journey. And this is what I call the content engine. I talked about this a while ago when I said being as relevant as possible to an audience in real time. So when I talked about tracking, like think about like, the Bourne Identity, right? When the NSA is like chasing Jason Bourne, they're all in that room and there's like all these, LCD, they're tracking his whereabouts through GPS and all this. And, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Building a command center where you're looking at their conversation in real time, where they're having it, what they're saying. And then more importantly, being able to like flip the switch and say, hey, this is happening right now. Let's brainstorm some ideas. Let's create a piece of content. Let's promote it. Let's amplify it through paid social, and all within an hour, right? And that's probably hard to do. I mean, if you work in a regulated industry like healthcare or finance, good luck. I mean, there are some more sophisticated brands that are willing to take some risk in that regard, but for the most part, you're going to have a challenge. Maybe an hour is too short. Maybe it's 4 or 5 hours, and that's still okay. If you remember back in 2013, Oreo did this during the Super Bowl, right? And everybody knows the Oreo moment, the tweet, that you can dunk in the dark. And if you haven't heard of it, Google it. Just Google Oreo tweet, and you'll see it. And it was a situation where the power went out at the stadium when the Niners were playing the Baltimore Ravens, and the power was out for I think an hour. And 15, 20 minutes later, there was a tweet from Oreo that said, "Power out, ? No problem. You can still dunk in the dark." They added this really cool image of, this cup of milk or this glass of milk. It was kind of at night, the shadow, it looked like there was like the moon coming in, and a cup of milk and then a couple Oreos. And that thing was been talked about in Harvard Business Review case studies. It's been talked about in white papers and ebooks, and it happened, almost 10 years ago, right? We're in 2001. This happened in 2013. And since then, a lot of brands have tried to replicate this, right? Tried to be relevant to, the Academy Awards or the Super Bowl, things like that. Now, the problem is that it's kind of played out, but not so much, because when you talk about micro communities and monitor what they're saying and be relevant to them, yeah, you're not going to do it at the Super Bowl, most likely. Or if you do, and you're monitoring a group of data scientists and they're talking about, the quarterback percentage completion rate of Tom Brady, and they're doing some math around that, then maybe you do something that is targeted just towards them, and that could go viral to this audience, right? But it's not going to be the Oreo tweet. That's what we all want, but reality, it's not going to happen. So building these micro communities and building a content engine in order to reach them in real time is important. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, right? There's a lot of conversations with legal, with, your brand team, stuff like that. So I'll let you guys worry about that. But once you have that, building that micro community and creating content quickly and efficiently, and that's relevant, can really help you in your content marketing efforts. Also, building branded communities. This is not like a new concept. There was years ago, Starbucks had My Starbucks Idea. In fact, that still exists. If you go to mystarbucksidea.com, you can like suggest anything to Starbucks, and if it makes sense, they'll implement it. In this case, for Legos, they've basically built this platform for Lego enthusiasts to go in and suggest things and build things. And if it makes sense, then a lot of times, Lego will basically put it into retail, and I think you might even get paid in some regard. But I don't think that even matters to these enthusiasts. The fact that they're building a place for their micro community, right? These are logo enthusiasts. This is their micro community. They built a place for these individuals to interact, to collaborate, to give product ideas, to get prizes and exclusive stuff like that. And that's all that matters. These people do not need to be paid, right? These aren't influencers. They're not taking photos. They don't have abs. They're not, taking photos by the pool with products. These are just probably, weird individuals who do Legos. And all they care about is the fact that Legos is paying attention to them. And that's why Legos is so successful is they understand the power of community, right? And they've built a place for their community to interact and have those not just one-on-one conversations between Lego and them, but also for them to interact with each other. This is another trend. It's actually not so new either. This is screenshots from Bleacher Report. And this is a community that I belong to. And I get all my news from Bleacher Report, but they've built in this community capability based on, what teams that you like, and you can decide who you like when you first get the app and change it throughout your using it. But in this case, I'm a Niner fan, I'm a Laker fan, so I belong to those communities, and I can post in these communities at any point in time. And I have a community of people that I follow that follow me. And all we do is like bash competitors of, we bash the Clippers, we bash the Raiders, and we talk about getting a new quarterback, stuff like that. And we're building community. And the reason why they're doing this is because if Facebook ever goes away, or Twitter goes away, or, we saw what happened with MySpace and Friendster and, others, this does not go away. This is owned by Bleacher Report. This is their community of individuals. I don't need a Twitter account to go in here. I don't need an Instagram account to go in here. I can post to my channels from here, but all of these conversations are happening in app. And so that is just an opportunity for, brands who can afford to like build an app and build a community and provide good content. This is a way to kind of really activate your micro communities, or again, give them a place to have conversations and talk about the things that they're passionate about. So I've talked a lot about micro communities today. I've kind of given a lot about building audiences and segmenting audiences, and more importantly, how you can use these audiences to provide better content, to provide better targeting. I want it to be as actionable as possible, and I'm open to any questions, and I'm happy to continue this conversation on social media.